In this edition of INN's CEO Talks, we are at the Vancouver Resource Investment Conference, and I'm joined by Brandon Macdonald of Fireweed Metals. Brandon, welcome.
Happy to be here.
You've had a pretty active and successful past 12 months. You want to bring us up to speed or up to date on what's happened that has made the past year so exciting for you?
Yeah, it's been a bit breakneck. I mean, we, starting from the beginning of last year, added two projects in addition to our primary flagship project, and the bigger one of the two was the Mactung tungsten deposit, which we agreed to buy off the NWT government. This is a project that came out of North American Tungsten, who went bankrupt in 2015. So that actually precipitated the name change. So we were previously Fireweed Zinc. We became Fireweed Metals. Kept the fireweed, which is an important part of our branding. That's the official flower of Yukon Territory. So it was a key part of our brand, but felt necessary to kind of take that pivot to metals. And now that we're kind of a polymetallic multi-project company, it expands what you're trying to do. And on the back of that, we executed our biggest ever drill program at the flagship project, the Macmillan Pass Zinc project. Had our best ever drill result late in the year, and then raised $35 million in December, 20 million of which came from the Lundin family. So
and that's on the strength of the results of that drilling program.
Yeah. And I mean, strength on of course, the projects, the appeal of each one. The drill program definitely helps, but I think the mind was kind of made up before that, right? These are pretty mature projects. So one drill hole can definitely make that incremental improvement, but it tends not to be like a true pure discovery play, a sudden complete change, right?
Mm-hmm. So where are you at on that project right now? What are your next steps?
So the two key projects, so the Macmillan Pass Zinc project, that was a project we had a resource statement on, or an economic study in 2018. We had, I guess, the Hollywood problem of making an additional discovery. So we kind of need to take one step back to take two steps forward. So we need to define the discovery, what we call boundary zone, which is the main and west subzones of that. We need to define what that is. That's where the best ever drill result came from. So clearly a zone that you want to wrap some numbers around before you get stuck into feasibility and permitting and stuff like that.
Well, you're well placed financially to be able to carry out that drill program now as well.
Yeah, well, that's the exciting thing. Last year, 2022, our biggest ever drill program. 2023 might be 3 times that size. So this is, the challenge and opportunity for the team is that we've got such a bigger budget than we've ever had before, but now comes all the, moving parts of trying to execute something that big. It's exciting for us. We hope it's exciting for investors to have a scale of program like that, but it doesn't come without its stresses.
Well, and what are some of the challenges being that far north and in such a vast territory?
Yeah, look, it's the remoteness, seasonality, right? We're lucky that we have a road to the project.
Open year round?
No, so that's so the project or the road opens early to mid June and then closes early October. Mm-hmm. So we're not constrained by that, but we're constrained to bring things in by road during that, right? So outside of that, you might have to fly things in. So for example, before the road closes each year, we make sure that our fuel tanks are full, right? So we can go quite a bit further and start the next year before the road opens. Mm-hmm. But generally remotely, this is Canada's north. The opportunity is that it's almost a fresh set of eyeballs in a lot of this ground. It's new, it's underexplored. The challenge is the bar for success is high, right? Because you're not next to a rail, you're not immediately next to a port or something like that.
Mm-hmm. So you need the project to have the scale that you can then add in your own infrastructure to get your resource to market.
Yeah, and I heard a good expression that mega projects don't get built because of infrastructure. Infrastructure gets built because of mega projects. We're lucky that the combined Yukon government and federal government committed $71 million to improve our access roads. That road I was talking about that would help make it a year-round road. That's great. I mean, you see now that the federal government has $2.7 billion set aside for infrastructure to Canadian critical minerals projects. We'd love to tap in more of that to make the road just that much better, to maybe look at a power line or something like that. So,
Well, these are all elements that support what you're doing and help to confirm this is, as you say, a potential mega project.
yeah, and I think that's a huge endorsement. I think as an investor, when you're looking at projects, it's like, okay, well, the government committing $71 million to it, which is more than we've spent on it, is a pretty big endorsement, and that came through an MOU with the First Nations. So that's, it's not an explicit endorsement from them, but it's certainly an implicit endorsement, right? So that's pretty good check mark for us.
Well, it also speaks to the cooperation and buy-in from the First Nations in the area, which is vitally important when you're moving forward with projects of this nature.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's essential. There is no project without First Nation buy-in, right? I mean, kind of de facto before, but now pretty explicitly with the ratification of the UN Declarations of Rights of Indigenous People, right? We understand there's now free, prior, informed consent, and this is a thing that we need to work within, and it's something I think we're personally proud to work within that framework, because we consider the consent of the local First Nations a non-negotiable part of our proceeding.
So what's your timeline on this project? What do you envision being kind of the next 4 or 5 year rollout?
It depends. I mean, look, on the two main projects, Mac Pass and Mactung, Mactung has had a feasibility study, in 2008, so it's a bit of time ago. It has been through the environmental assessment. So we have to look at, do we want to redo those things? How does that affect our ability to push it forward? We want to look at an old design or go to a new design. The Zinc project, Mac Pass, we got some work to do. I think it's going to take us a couple of years to really define properly the opportunity there to get into the environmental assessment. Environmental assessments in Northern Canada are not quick things, but they are good things and necessary things, and they're robust. So I think that's, for us, is one of the things that we've always believed in since we started the company is not to rest on our laurels, not to think we've defined an opportunity and just wait for a buyout. That's not an approach we believe in taking. I think it's one that means you don't take ownership over long-term problems. It means you don't get proactive about First Nations engagement. And your investors and the First Nations will know if you're taking that approach, right? And then they don't want to talk to you if you are. So I think for us, it was always the right thing to do, to say, like, look, we're going to build this. And if along the way someone wants to partner with us or there's some sort of M&A possible, certainly willing to discuss it.
But it's not your primary strategy, which I think is good, because it allows you to keep pushing forward and moving to the next stage of development.
Yeah, and with that financing we did with the Lundin family, putting in $20 million of the $35 million we raised, like they're mine builders, right? They've built mines all over the world. This is a family that gives us the credibility to build this and the capacity, and there's a deep, well of talent within that group to draw from when it comes time. So I think there's little question now that if Fireweed wants to build these projects, we can.
Isn't that a fabulous place to be?
Yeah, absolutely.
What in the next 3 to 6 months are most important for you to be focused on, and for viewers who are wanting to track your progress to be looking for?
I guess two very different things. What are we focused on, and what should viewers watch for? Of course, so much of our team is focused on the upcoming drill program. Like I said, being so much larger than past ones, there's a lot of moving parts for that, and we're quite involved in that. But really what the viewers should be watching for is things including, like, we've only released 2 out of 32 drill holes from last year. So we have, we have quite a bit of drill results yet to come. You're still getting pieces of 2022 and 2023. Wow. We've got a few studies coming out, like particularly, I think probably soonest will be the updated resource on Mactung. We're kind of refreshing the historic resource and reinvigorating that. That's likely to be Q2 this year. Then really it's the commencement of the drill program. Ultimately, the next 12 to 18 months is the most catalyst-rich ever for the company. Mm-hmm. So it's an exciting time to be involved, and hopefully it's an exciting time to be a shareholder.
Well, and you're in that critical metal space, zinc and tungsten. what makes these so important now? Because they've been around for a while, but as we're seeing this shift in the way that we're moving towards the electrification of everything, how important are these critical metals? What's their role?
Well, they're no less important than they were before.
Yeah.
Both zinc and tungsten. There isn't really modern society without those two. They're not a negotiable metal
Right.
within the framework of society as we live now. Really, what's changed is one, it's the move towards a low in carbon intensity future. So something like zinc, essential to solar farms, wind turbines. It's also essential to infrastructure as we refresh all the aging infrastructure around the world. Tungsten, really so much used in machining and hardened steels. You don't build really EVs or regular vehicles without tungsten. It's essential in aerospace and those high temperature applications. It's essential in integrated circuits. And so, that's one degree of essentialness, which has kind of driven this critical mineral strategy. The other is the changing geopolitical landscape, right? So tungsten in particular, 85% of it comes from China, is mined in China. So you can imagine that there is no industry in the West, like none, if we don't have tungsten. And you can imagine the anxiety that the Canadian, American, and EU and Japanese governments have about China just deciding, no, we're not exporting this anymore, and what that would do to industry in the rest of the world.
Well, we're definitely seeing North American political interests paying attention to that and saying we have to have these resources available here.
Yes.
You look at the Biden administration's moves towards ensuring that those markets are supplied by local resources.
Yeah, well, I think you're going to see a big, onshoring, deglobalization, friendshoring, or whatever you want to call it. I think the key thing is that sort of unfettered globalization, where you assume that politics is a steady state, and therefore anything you can sign now is good forever, is not a good strategy, right? Like COVID exposed that for a variety of reasons, but then, Russia invading Ukraine, additional tensions with China and Taiwan, and all the sort of implications of that are such that it certainly, you recognize that being completely undiversified and reliant on a country that may not have your best interests in mind is not a great position, right? So that's hopefully part of the opportunity for Western miners, is that push to kind of bring things home.
Well, I think it's quite an interesting time to be in these two critical metals because, as you point out, domestic sources aren't there.
Yeah.
We really need to pay attention to it now, and keeping in mind how long it takes to go from the state that you're at to actually going into production.
Yeah.
It's important that there be the right supports for you to be able to move as quickly as possible.
Yeah. No, and I think the federal critical mineral strategy was a bit half-baked at first, but they're working to flesh it out, and I think they're on the right track.
Wonderful. I wish you great success for a whole host of reasons, most definitely for yourself and shareholders, but for all of us here who rely on these critical metals.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thanks for your time today.